cut it there.
Cut! Ribbon!
And cut.
Cut.
Cut. Terrific.
Cut.
And cut. Cut. Let's try it again.
Cut!
And cut.
Cut. Check the gate.
Cut it.
Welcome to Cut, Just Another Movie Podcast. I'm Manny,
I'm Angie.
and we're two siblings that love movies. Surprise, a little shorty episode. This time, we're not going to do a deep dive like we usually do. We're actually going to do a review of a movie that we got to see before it premiered today. We're recording this on Friday. So potentially by the time this comes out, most of you will have been able to see it. And the movie that we're talking about is PIG. And if you're watching us on YouTube, which you should be, again, like, subscribe, comment. It helps the algorithm. If you're watching us on YouTube, you'll see a pig mask behind me. And 5,000 points goes out to whoever can tell us in the comments where it's from, because it's from something.
The pig mask is mine, and I bought it for Halloween last year. Didn't get to dress up, obviously, and was kind of feeling sad that I probably wouldn't have a good use for it until maybe next Halloween, but I just remembered. Surprise! I just remembered I had it, so we pulled it out.
Well, because we had going back and forth. Usually we try to have something thematically in the background.
Right.
To whatever movie that we're doing. For this one, I was like, maybe we should use bacon, but we want to be sensitive to our non-meat eaters out there. So we were lucky enough to go see PIG this week before it was open to the public. Beyond Fest hosted it, as well as Neon. So thanks to those people. This isn't a sponsored podcast by any means, although Neon and Beyond Fest, if you're listening. They
partner with American Cinematheque and Death Waltz Records, and they do some pretty dope screenings throughout the whole year. I think before it was just like a week or two or a month.
Well, I remember Beyond Fest, they would do it in the fall.
Yeah, because it was it's mostly genre, horror genre type things.
Yeah,
most
thrillers. And so it would be around like October, November.
Yeah, and I remember 2 years ago, I went to their screening of The Exorcist with Linda Blair was there doing a Q&A. Yeah, and that was really cool.
What theater was that?
The Egyptian.
Nice.
Yeah. So that was my first time at the Egyptian. It was really cool.
I saw when they did the reprint of 2001, new 35 millimeter, it was 70 millimeter restoration. Keir Dalia and Gary Lockwood were there. And actually, if you could see behind Angie, there's an autograph photo right there. That's where I got it. Beyond Fest hosted that, the same at the Egyptian. But they always host really great events. They premiered Parasite before it was wide released in LA and New York. And
they premiered PIG, which we didn't really know about when we got tickets for it.
We'll sort of do the same format that we do with our deep dives. But do you remember hearing about PIG?
I think you sent me the trailer, or you sent me the poster.
Yeah.
And then I saw the trailer a little bit afterwards.
That's my first memory, seeing the profile shot of Nicolas Cage, and it just said PIG, and I was like, if this is the trend of his last few films, like, this is going to be pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And that was my first, and then the trailer obviously came out and really fit the look of the poster. And I just thought it was sort of, they went really well hand in hand. And again, thematically for what the movie ended up being, I thought they did a really good job setting up the trailer and just sort of the marketing behind it, which is literally just Nic Cage in a dark movie. And there's a pig in it.
What I got from the trailer was that it was going to be a revenge movie, not unlike John Wick, which it's getting a lot of comparisons to, because from the first trailer, that's kind of what it makes it seem like. So that's why I was kind of drawn to it. I was like, oh, this is John Wick with a pig and Nicolas Cage.
Well, even Mandy's a revenge flick.
Yeah.
And we'll talk, what we're going to do is the first half of this podcast is going to be spoiler free. So we highly recommend you go see it. Obviously, we wouldn't be talking about it if we didn't want you guys to go see it. The second half, however, will be completely full of spoilers, and we'll do an alarm sound and let you know. Turn the podcast off if you don't want to be spoiled before you go see the movie, because again, it came out this weekend. I think it's going to be an indie darling for sure. And let's go ahead and start with the basic info. This film was directed by Michael Sarnowski. Think I'm getting that right. This is his first directorial feature, so it's his feature debut. It was also written by him and producer Vanessa Block, starring, like I just said, Nicolas Cage as Rob, Alex Wolff as Amir. And we'll talk about Alex a lot, but also, hint, hint, we're going to do another shorty podcast next week on another film that is about to be released.
It's going to be 2 weeks with Alex Wolff.
Yes. Like I said, the film is directed and written by Michael Sarnowski. He had written and directed a few short films leading up to this, and he also wrote a TV series called Olympia, which I had never heard of. The synopsis reads on Olympia: when Harley Sage decides she wants something more than the life of a farm girl, she lands a dance scholarship at Olympia University. But new surroundings pose fresh problems for an extraordinary girl who can control the wind. And that's all the real information that I could find.
Cool.
The poster is a young woman, and it looks like there's something else going on. And it kind of looks like something you'd see on the CW.
I was just going to mention that.
Yeah.
It sounds like a CW show.
The cast looks very CW-ish. And I originally thought that that's probably where it came out. But I really couldn't find any more details. Or even on YouTube, try to find a clip. I couldn't really find anything. Nicolas Cage decided to produce the film after reading the script, and he thought it shared similar elements of past movies, Joe and Manny, which are probably his more critically acclaimed movies as of late. And his production company, Saturn Films, which I noticed in a lot of his films, there's that title card, and I always wondered, does he own it or what's the association there? But yeah, he does own it, so it makes sense. Like, why most of probably like late 90s to now, it has some kind of Saturn Films. Other than that, that's pretty much all the basic information that was out there. Like I said, it's a first-time director, so there isn't much about him. And so let's go ahead and go with the review. Angie, what were your first impressions leaving the theater?
The film didn't really go as I expected. Like when I was comparing the film to the initial trailer, it was pretty different from what the trailer kind of set up in a way. Like I mentioned earlier, my first thought was of John Wick. And this isn't really like a spoiler, but it's not like John Wick like at all. So that was kind of my first impression, was that it was completely different than what I thought I was going into. Not to say that it was bad, because I really enjoyed the movie. I liked it a lot. I don't know that I would see it again.
Wow.
But I did enjoy it a lot. Unless it was like something where, you know, someone I know hadn't seen it and I was like, oh, you should watch this movie. Then I would watch it with them. But like, as far as like replayability for myself, that wouldn't be something I would just like put on. Yeah. Which doesn't mean it was bad. It wasn't bad. It was really good. I really liked it.
What, I guess, were your like expectations that you had?
Like a bloody, violent, like revenge.
Like Mandy?
Movie. Like Mandy, because it was Nicolas Cage and because the trailer was just so like, where's my pig? You know, like the whole time. So I was like, oh man, he's going to find whoever took his pig and he's going to fucking murder them. And so I guess that's kind of what I expected. And what I got instead was a very kind of muted revenge movie, which isn't bad. I liked that. I just wasn't expecting it. What did you think about it?
I also had a similar feeling where I thought that it was going to be a straight revenge film. And even though Nic Cage looks very decrepit and like not fast moving in the trailers, I still thought like somehow he's going to like, you know, the anguish of losing the pig, that he was just going to go ape shit on everyone. So you're right. It was like a subdued version of, you know, your John Wicks and Mandy's. There's more narrative than I thought there would be too. I thought a lot of it, especially the way the film develops, It's very slow. There isn't a lot of dialogue in the very beginning. That's where I thought like, well, he's not going to have a lot of lines. It's just going to be more physical but it didn't really play out that way, which isn't a bad thing. I enjoyed most of it. The ending left me wanting a little bit more. So I was a little bit underwhelmed with the ending. And once we talk about spoilers, I'll talk more about that. But just off the bat, that was sort of the impression that it left me, where I thought 3/4 of it was pretty solid. And just the end was not that it was a bad ending, but it left me, for everything that he goes through in the movie and again, how it develops, it just left me wanting a little bit more resolution, or at least more payback.
Right.
It kind of left me just kind of like, eh.
Yeah, I agree with that too. I wish there would have been maybe like another 15 minutes after, when it actually ends. Because there was, the kind of climax, and then there's maybe like 10 minutes after the climax, and you're like, oh, okay.
I mean, I think if there was one, no, maybe I need to save it. If I say the word, then it's going to spoil some of it. But I feel like just with the journey that he goes through, and even the characters around, Nic Cage's character, like Alex and stuff, they have very similar trajectories.
Yeah.
And so I thought one of them is going to like get payback, or one of them's going to like get, something positive at the end of it. And it just kind of never really gets to that point. And then you're just sort of left with one of the thoughts that I had is like, why did we go through this?
Yeah.
Part
why
of me
did we
would,
go through this journey?
Yeah, why do we go through this journey if there wasn't a little bit of revenge?
There are definitely some revelations and some sort of resolve, not necessarily the way you think, but as far as the overall story.
What did you think overall of the look of the movie, the cast, production?
Yeah, I really liked the way the movie looked because it was really dark, but it wasn't like I said, I didn't super know what to expect going into it, because I was like, okay, this is a Nicolas Cage movie. It seems like a revenge movie. So it could go either, in the vein of Mandy, which is like completely ridiculous, or it'll be a more like serious kind of tone. And from, early things that I had seen about Pig before we saw it, maybe like 1 or 2 days, it wasn't even that long before, it really seemed like it was kind of like a serious take on a revenge story, because people were saying that Nicolas Cage was like really good, which like no surprise there. Everyone's surprised that Nicolas Cage is a good actor.
Especially talking about, Joe and Mandy, where he's really solid. And then the other movies that he's made lately, they've just been kind of like whatever. But I feel like he just makes those choices on purpose, where he feels like, okay, this script is really solid. I need to be great actor Nicolas Cage. And these other movies that are just kind of filler, I don't have to be, great Nicolas Cage. And so seeing Pig, he sort of goes back to form on that he is a great actor when he wants to be and when he chooses to be. When it's some low budget, I just,
Bangkok Dangerous.
Yeah. Or where he doesn't need to go over the top. I think a lot of people maybe think like that's just how he, especially later generations of people that haven't seen his early work.
The memes is what it is. It's all of his overacting.
Exactly. I feel like he's become that caricature, or people think of him as that. But with Pig, he's very subtle. There are moments where he's very subtle. He's not in your face. He has a lot of quiet, solid moments. One of my favorite scenes, which I'll get to a little bit later, is him, at a restaurant. And
it's probably going to be the same.
And it's just a conversation.
That scene was so good.
And the camera's mostly on him.
Yeah.
And this other character. But that's where I think he really shines.
Also, I really enjoyed how funny the movie was, because there were so many moments that were like funny, where like the theater bust up laughing.
But it wasn't like over the top.
It's like
funny.
a dry funny.
Yeah.
which I really, really like in movies. And especially when you can pull it off. And I feel like Nicolas Cage and Alex Wolff were really able to kind of have that relationship to where they shared these like quiet moments of humor that were really effective. So I really liked how the movie was funny.
Yeah, I thought they complemented each other really well.
Yeah.
Like they're the little kind of tag team because they're mostly together through most of the film. And, you know, Alex's character is young and, you know, doesn't really know better and is trying to make something of himself. And Nic Cage is obviously the elder statesman and kind of like his role model in a way, you know, as weird as that sounds.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about that later when we start talking about the movie.
The controlled Nic Cage in this movie, as far as not being super animated and not being over the top, I thought was, I feel like a lot of people that see this movie are going to be like, what?
Yeah.
Like he had that in him when he's had it, you know, it's just the choices that he's made lately with some of the characters in films.
Well, because, you know, when you're thinking of Mandy, Color Out of Space, even Willy's Wonderland. Hope
Which
I'm
we
saying
never-
Willy and not Wally.
We didn't finish. We couldn't get through.
Finish. It wasn't that I didn't want to get through it. It's just that I guess I just wasn't in the right mood to get through it. I don't know. I'll probably still finish watching it, but I think we might be in the middle of like a Nicolas Cage renaissance because we have Pig, and then we have the movie coming up next with Pedro Pascal where Nicolas Cage plays himself.
Oh, right.
And he's like hired to be at Pedro's party. And then like shit starts happening and they have to go on some hijinks.
Well, do you remember how he was supposed to be Tiger King?
Yes.
And it was going to be produced by Amazon?
Yes.
And actually that day of the premiere, they asked him about it and it's not happening anymore. Amazon basically pulled out, and the reasoning that Nic Cage gave, which I think makes a lot of sense, is that Amazon pulled out because there's no real interest in Tiger King anymore. It was
literally like 2 months and
it
that was
was
it.
like a comment. It was just like 2 months of
like they should have
nonstop
done
talk.
it there.
But I mean, that's so fast, you know? Nic Cage talked about how the script was great, but that is just, you know, over a year later, and there's just not a lot of interest in it. And so they thought like that it wouldn't be a commercial success, which I get. But at the same time, I still kind of wanted to see.
They could always rebrand it and like make it not Tiger King. Just make the story really similar, I guess. And be like based on Tiger. I don't know.
Right.
I think people would still see it.
Just be the same character and just
especially
Nic Cage
if you had
with the tiger.
Nic Cage, like people are definitely going to see it.
Right.
Like Amazon's made worse things than that. So.
But I think they just wanted a bona fide hit.
Yeah.
Right out of the gate.
Which I think it would have been for sure.
I think it would have been, but like you said, way earlier. Like I think it's too late now, and just a lot of things have happened the past 18 months. And I think it was just a moment of time that you're never ever going to get back. Speaking of the look of the movie, I thought it was shot really well. Like you said, it's on the dark side. So it really makes you look into the shadows, and not everything is perfectly lit. Compositionally, it's brilliant. I thought the framing of most of the scenes were like spot on. There's a sequence where they're going into the city, and it's sort of Nic Cage's kind of like, you could tell he's kind of, because he lives in the woods and he's going back to the big city, and he feels a little bit disoriented. And so I thought the editing choices there, where it's just like a lot of crosses offs, like were done really well. And yeah, I think it fit the story. The look that they were trying to go for, it fit the story really well. The casting, the bad guy, which we'll get to in a little bit, I thought he was done really well. And can't forget about the pig,
Brandy,
who, by the way, had an understudy, right?
Brandy had an understudy. That was one of the things that I kind of just noticed when the credits were rolling, is I just happened to look and it was like pig, Brandy, pig understudy. I was like, what? There's an understudy for the pig?
The credits are interesting. So I highly recommend you stay through if you're not a credits person, you should stay through the credits, because, you know, we'll get to it later, but basically there's some little kind of hidden features as the credits. And it's not some Marvel post-credit scene.
There's no mid-credit scene.
They're not going to make it a franchise where Nicolas Cage is some kind of superhero, but by the end of the credits, there's some cool things to look out for. So should we go into spoilers?
Yeah.
Okay,
Let's do,
so
this is your warning.
Yes. Boo!
Can we put like a real sound?
Like what?
Like a real alarm? Oh, we'll make like a pig snorting.
Here is your spoiler warning in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. From here on forth, we'll be talking major spoilers. So if you don't want to get it ruined, stop listening to the podcast. Go watch the movie and then come back and finish the podcast. We're going to try to give a rundown of most of the movie. Also, forgive us if we forget stuff because this is the first time that we're attempting this without any notes. So just kind of going with our memories, which may or may not be good.
At the beginning of the film, we see Nicolas Cage's character, Rob, and his trusty pig, who's just named Pig, right? She doesn't have like a name.
I don't think there's a name.
She's just a pig. And they're in the woods, kind of walking around, doing their own thing. And you realize that she's a truffle hunting pig. And so what truffles are is they're like a very expensive prized fungus that grows in the dirt. And these pigs are trained to sniff them out. And then you can sell the truffles for, a certain amount to restaurants. And whatever dish, if you go to a restaurant and there's truffle in it, the dish is going to be expensive. And so Nicolas Cage just kind of lives in the woods with his pig and he has his own little cabin. He's like cooking his own food. And from the get-go, the title card of this sequence is called like truffle tart or like something tart.
The film is broken down into 3 parts.
3 dishes, basically. And so the first one is a tart. And so from the get-go, we see that Nicolas Cage is a cook, basically, because we don't know if he's like a chef or what, but we know that he knows how to cook because he's making this tart from scratch. He makes the dough from scratch. He makes some for his pig and he feeds his little pig the food. And so he just is living this quaint little life like in the woods.
Enter Alex. And what kind of car was he driving?
It's a Camaro.
It's like a yellow Camaro. Yeah. He comes in blasting classical music, trying to seem very sophisticated. And he drops off this little ice cooler. And we don't really know like what is the interchange, but we assume like it's truffles. And again, Alex's character is a young, kind of full of himself, kind of thinks that he knows it all. And
he's very aloof.
Yeah. And he's the complete opposite of Nicolas Cage's character. And so there's a deal done. And essentially Alex's character is buying the truffles off of Nicolas Cage. And then there's a scene where he's in his home and there's a cassette tape and it says for Rob, right? It
says for Robin.
Oh, that's right. For Robin. And he has a little like cheap boombox and he puts the tape in and we hear just like a snippet and it's a woman's voice, but we really don't know who Robin is. But obviously it hits Nicolas Cage's character deep because he's very, retrospective in that moment.
We don't know Nicolas Cage's character's name yet. So when the tape said for Robin and we hear like a woman's voice, I was like, oh, is that Robin?
Mm-hmm.
And then Nicolas Cage's character is visibly upset by it. And the little pig comes and like makes sure he's okay. And he's like, oh, I'm fine.
And then comes the big scene, right?
Nighttime. Yeah, he's sleeping and the pig is kind of like sniffing at the door.
Mm-hmm.
And Nicolas Cage is like, oh, it's just coyotes. Like, just leave it. It's fine. But the pig is pretty like adamant about sniffing at the door, like showing that something's wrong. And so Nicolas Cage finally gets up and is like, well, what's happening? What's going on?
And then there's lights out the window.
Mm-hmm.
You start seeing lights and obviously it's more than coyotes. And this is one of my favorite sequences camera shot wise because he goes to the door and all of a sudden you hear just like a pow and the camera and it's a single take. The camera goes down with Nicolas Cage.
Yeah.
He gets knocked over from the door and then there's like a struggle and they're kidnapping his pig and then he gets like hit in the face with a blunt object.
I think he gets hit with a cast iron or something.
Something, yeah. And so he's on the ground and there's like you can hear the pig squealing, which is really shitty.
It's very upsetting.
And they put it in a bag and he's just on the ground trying to just figure out what's happening. And then they end up leaving with the pig and he's just on the ground, with the bloody face.
Which I will say, I think it would take like 7 people to take that pig away. That pig had to have weighed like 350 pounds.
Yeah, they made it seem
especially with it like
extremely
wriggling
easy.
and going
Yeah.
crazy. There's no way.
And so therein lies the question mark of, where did the pig go? Who were these guys?
This is kind of where the movie essentially starts because we're trying to find out who took the pig, why did they take the pig, can we get the pig back? And the next morning, after Nicolas Cage passes out because of his wounds, essentially, he wakes up and immediately is like, I gotta go get this pig back.
The search begins.
And he has this like beat up old truck in his or not even a driveway, in the dirt in front of his cabin. And, he manages to start it. He has a gas can that I'm sure he has for emergencies, but God knows how long it's been since his truck has moved. So he probably gets like not even a mile away when the truck dies.
Right.
Once the truck breaks down, I'm pretty sure he walks to like a close by like cafe that happens to be near a main road. He gets there and he manages to use their phone. And it's just funny because all these people are kind of like having breakfast and stuff. And he walks in and he's like bleeding and he has like a huge beard.
Yeah.
And he's just like, can I use your phone?
Before that, though, he asked for like a waitress or someone that has worked there. And he was like, oh, yeah, she died like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So you could tell that
It's
there's
been a
a
while.
history there. And like you said, it's been a while since he's been in like civilization. He's just been isolated up in the woods.
He uses the cafe's phone to call Alex Wolff's character,
Amir.
And so Amir comes and swoops him up in his Camaro. And
Still rocking classical music.
Yeah, they have this funny moment where they're driving towards the city and Amir has his classical music. But not only is it classical music, he has this like voiceover that's like, this is Tchaikovsky from the blah, blah, blah century or whatever.
And classical music is the greatest music that
'Cause
is
it never
there
ages.
And there's like rhythm and harmony and that's what makes
And so in the middle of this, Nicolas Cage just kind of shuts it off and they have this really cute like slapstick back and forth moment where Amir keeps turning it on, Rob turns it off, and he turns it on and he turns it off. And so they head to the big city in search of, some connection that Rob knows that can possibly help him find who took his pig.
And then they enter a room where there's this bald guy.
And the city is Portland, right?
Yeah, so we should say that this takes place in Portland, Oregon, in the woods, and then obviously in the city. And they meet this man that Nicolas Cage's character knows, and they have this back and forth, and he's kind of a mysterious character. And then there's a point where he tells them to meet somewhere, or he gives them a note, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we don't know what the note says. And so Nicolas Cage walks out of frame, and that's a really great reveal with Amir's character, because
just,
Amir was sitting there
the whole time.
where you thought it was just this strange guy and Nicolas Cage's character, but he was sitting there the whole time. And so Nicolas Cage walks out the door, and then Amir kind of looks back at the mysterious guy and he's like, do you even know his real name? And that's when you kind of start piecing together that Nicolas Cage's character is sort of more than who you think he is.
So then we move on to a cook fight club. Would you call it that?
Those were my thoughts exactly the first time I saw
so he
it.
goes to this like underground. He tells a story about, he calls it the hotel something.
Yeah.
And it's in the back room of this restaurant.
I thought it was like in the basement.
Something like that. And he's telling Amir a story about how there used to be this hotel and now the only thing that's left of it is this like basement foundation where this man, who I believe is the bald guy they saw before, runs this chef fight club is what I'm going to call it, where I don't know if you've ever met any chefs or any line cooks, but they're like angry people. Like it takes a certain person to be like a line cook or even a chef. So it's not hard to imagine that they would have this kind of fight club underground after hours to where they can take off all their frustrations from the day's cooking. And Rob shows up at this, fight club, and you see people are just kind of getting their ass kicked. And they're chefs, they're waiters, even I think, they're servers. And he writes his name down, and you have this kind of big moment where everyone just kind of stops doing what they're doing and they're staring at him writing his name on the wall. And then he turns away from his writing and it says Robin Feld. And so everyone just kind of starts placing their money or bets or whatever, entry money on the ground. And it's several people. So that's when you kind of start to see even more of like, who is this guy is a big name. This is definitely someone, especially in the restaurant world, it seems like.
Amir is in the background kind of witnessing this, and he still doesn't really get it. And so what looks like just like a server goes up to Nicolas Cage, and Nicolas Cage takes his like jacket off. And basically this server, who's like a nobody, just starts punching him in the face just over and over again, and eventually knocks Nic Cage down, and he's just like going just like...
Yeah, he gets like a minute.
Yeah. And Nicolas Cage in this whole time isn't fighting back. He's just kind of like taking it. And he gets more beat up in the face. And then finally they come around and like they take the server off Nicolas Cage, and Amir's just like, what is happening? Like, I don't understand. And obviously feels bad for Nic Cage, and he takes him and they go back to Amir's place, and he gets like ice on his face, and they ended up, he spends the night there, and then the next morning they're having breakfast.
Yeah, and this is when you get to part 2 of the movie.
Yeah.
So part 2 is like Mama's French toast, and I can't remember what the rest of it is. This is when you learn background on Amir and kind of what he does, or kind of like his family business. And he kind of shares to Nicolas Cage that this is after Amir finds out who Nicolas Cage is, Robin Feld. And Amir tells Rob a story about how, growing up, his parents would fight all the time, and every once in a while they'd have like a date night, and they'd usually come home drunk and fight some more. And he tells him about this one time where they went to this restaurant, and there was a chef that cooked them a meal that was so good that they came back like happy for once.
Yeah, they couldn't stop talking about it.
Yeah, that he had never seen his mom that happy. And then he kind of says like he hasn't seen her that happy since, and he kind of like trails off. And I think Rob asks him what happened. And then Amir tells Rob that she killed herself, basically. And that's when you learn that Amir is working for his dad.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of the truffle business or whatever it is that Amir's doing is kind of like what his dad also does, but Amir is trying to make his own way in the business.
Right. And that's where you get, again, the sense that Nicolas Cage's character, he's a chef, but he's like one of the best chefs in the Portland, Oregon area the last like 20 years. And he just sort of disappeared. And so you don't really, that's what I started wondering, is like, what happened that he ended up in a cabin just, looking for truffles
for 10
with
years,
the pig
at least.
for 10 years. Because it's obvious that the people in Portland, Oregon still remember him. And so to walk away from that, it seemed like something major must have happened.
Once Rob gets his ass kicked, backtracking a little bit, at the chef's fight club, he gets another piece of information from the guy that runs it, which is on another piece of paper. And it leads them to this restaurant. I don't remember what it's called, but it seems like a bougie kind of Portland
very high
restaurant.
Class restaurant.
And we find out that it's like Amir's dad's like place. Like, I don't know if that means that's the place that he buys for and sells for, or if that's just like a place that he goes to where Rob asks Amir if he can, he's like, hey, you need to get us reservations at this place for lunch. And Amir's like, dude, I don't know if I could do that. That's like my dad's place. I don't know if I can. But Amir sells truffles to them. So he ends up somehow getting a reservation there, and they show up and they have this meal, and it's like, I can't remember it's like a scallop on something.
Right.
But the waitress is giving them this whole like, here we take a journey through the forests of Portland, and like shit, like just like what you would find.
It's like the appetizer, and like he just like takes
he just like takes it with his hand and eats it.
Just no emotion.
And then he's like, I need to talk to the chef. And so the chef comes out, And you find out that this chef worked for 2 months at Nicolas Cage's restaurant as a prep cook, I think is what he said, which is like the worst. But this is going into one of my favorite scenes, what I think you were talking about earlier, which is one of the best scenes in the whole movie. Not only Nicolas Cage is really good in this, but the guy that plays the chef is also so good in this.
Mm-hmm.
Like just his like facial expressions are so good. And Nicolas Cage Rob goes into this spiel about how like, I don't know if the chef brings up that he worked for him or if Rob does.
I think when he says the name, when he says, do you know who I am? And then he tells him, and then you could see on the chef's face, like, oh, yeah.
And then he goes, you worked for me for 2 months.
Yeah.
And I fired you because you kept overcooking the pasta.
He's like, did I?
Yeah.
And he's like trying to
that shit
fake
is so
that he
funny.
didn't remember.
Yeah.
And then Rob is like, you remember what you told me what you wanted to do? And then he's like, no. He's like, you told me that you wanted to start a pub. And he's like, why haven't you done that?
He's like, you want to start a pub with rooms at the top, like a real English pub. And he's like, why haven't you done that? Why didn't you do that? And the chef's like, well, people in Portland, like, they don't really like that.
There's
like,
no demand for it.
There's no demand. This is kind of how it is.
And
then this is where Nicolas Cage kind of really delivers, because Rob really starts like digging into the chef about how like he should have done what his dream was to do. He shouldn't have, ditched his dream to get this like bougie ass restaurant.
The line is, we don't get a lot of things to really care about.
Yeah.
And in a way that sort of summarizes the whole movie.
Yeah, definitely. And that was one of the taglines that I saw about the movie too.
Mm-hmm.
And just after, like, you have to see the scene. I can't even really duplicate what he says. But once Nicolas Cage kind of delivers this line, like the look on the chef's face is so good that it like goes from like, he's like smiling and then like his face just like melts off of his face basically while he's still smiling. It's so good.
All through that, because that conversation is Nic Cage and the other chef, you almost forget that Amir is even at the table. And I love that final shot where they finally show Amir, and Amir's face is equally as great.
Yeah.
It's just about just like, that was like the greatest, speech I've ever heard in my entire life.
And this all happens because Rob asks the chef about his pig. And he's like, dude, I'm looking for a pig. It was my pig. And the chef is like, I don't know what you're talking about. And that's when he goes into the spiel of like, you worked for me for 2 months and look, we don't get a lot of things to care about. Why didn't you do your stupid pub and like all this stuff? And then after, the chef's like, well, the guy who took your pig, you don't want to get into it with this guy. And then this is when kind of Nicolas Cage has the revelation that it's Amir's dad, or that Amir's dad has something to do with it. And so Amir's just like, dude, I had no idea. Like, I really didn't know. I'm sorry,
It's set up too that Amir and his dad aren't really speaking to each other, and there's a really frayed relationship between them. So it's not like Amir's working for his dad and they're all buddy, like, having a great time.
Mm-hmm.
There's definitely a rift in between their relationship. And so they're not very communicative, and Amir doesn't really see his dad as like a good guy.
Yeah. And so you do believe Amir when he's like, dude, I had no idea. Cause you're like, how could he? He doesn't even talk to, like, he hates his dad basically.
Right.
Because of what he says earlier in the movie.
The next sequence, you have Amir and Nicolas Cage splitting up. Nicolas Cage's character essentially goes to Amir's dad's because Amir doesn't want anything to do with like seeing his dad or anything. And Amir goes to a hospital. The first scene though from that sequence is Nicolas Cage and Amir's dad, who's played really well by Adam Arkin. And you could tell, that he's the bad guy right away. He lives in this really nice house. He's very wealthy. And here comes the contrast of Nicolas Cage walking in, and Nicolas Cage just basically gets to the point of like, tell me where my pig is. And there's this whole back and forth. And basically Adam Arkin basically tells Nic Cage that, that he doesn't want to, you shouldn't go there, but is very vague on what actually happens.
He tries to bribe him and says, like, look, I'll give you $20,000 for the pig. And Nicolas Cage is like, no. And he's like, 20 million. And he's like, no. And then he basically just kind of threatens him and says, look, I want you to leave. I don't ever want to see you again. You'll have, I don't know how much he says, but he says some amount of money. You'll have it in like by tomorrow if I never see you again. In the same scene though, like at the same time, I don't know if the scene is broken up with this scene that I'm about to talk about or if it happens after. Nicolas Cage ends up leaving Amir's dad's house after, they can't come to an agreement about the pig, basically. At the same time, Amir is at the hospital and we don't know why he's at the hospital. And he kind of leans up against the door and he says, "Hey, Mom, I met the chef that cooked you that meal that one time." And so we realize that Amir's mom isn't dead. She's in a coma. And so he's visiting his mom and the nurse comes by and was like, "Hey, I was just about to like change her bedpan or whatever. Do you want to come see her?" And he's like, "No." And then like the door opens and you see just like a silhouette of the mom in the coma. And then so we learn that Amir's mom isn't really dead.
Nicolas Cage is walking out of Amir's dad's house, and then waiting there is Amir, who we thought didn't want to have anything to do with his dad. And so he basically picks up Nicolas Cage and says, "I need you to get these things for me." And it's basically a list. And what the list is, it's ingredients for something, which we don't know up until that point. And so then comes a sequence of, trying to get the items. And then we get to a scene where Nicolas Cage is visiting, it looks like a bakery, right?
Yeah.
And there's a woman in the bakery. He's asking for
it's like a salted French bread or some French loaf. It's like a salted
some
something.
kind of bread.
Yeah.
He's like, I'd really like that. And then he ends up taking like 3 of them.
Yeah. And you find out also that this bakery was maybe the storefront for Rob's restaurant or something.
I thought it was more of his lady friend.
Oh, I thought it was like his old restaurant or something.
Okay. I got because he says something about the drapes.
He says something about the drapes, yeah, but I just figured it was like his old
and then
restaurant.
He's like, "Oh yeah, they look better without the drapes."
And then while this is happening, also you see Amir visiting someone named Jezebel, who were Rob's instructions, like go see Jezebel and ask for something. And this is when we find out that Rob's girlfriend, wife is dead because Jezebel's at the cemetery. And so he says, Amir lets Jezebel know that Rob sent him. And so Jezebel ends up taking Amir down to like some like basement type area that has a bunch of wine bottles that I think were Rob's collection.
Yeah, I think so.
From his restaurant. And so she hands him a specific bottle and is like, "Here, this is what you were asking for."
We cut to Nic Cage and Alex's characters. They're back at his dad's place.
This is the part that's weird to me.
Yeah. When I saw that, I was like, I thought they were back at Amir's place.
Oh, no, I knew they were back at the dad's place. But also, Rob and Amir's dad left on such like a sour, because he literally said, "I don't ever want to see you again or I'll kill you," basically.
Right. Yeah.
And now they're back at his house.
And they're
just
cooking.
Chilling. And the dad's awake too. So I'm like,
yeah.
Even if it was just Amir at the house, like I feel like their relationship wasn't Amir and his dad. Like he couldn't just show up at the house and be like, "I'm just going to cook food in your kitchen," without his dad being like, "What the fuck are you doing?"
Like I said, at first I thought, wait, are they somewhere else?
Or like, is the dad not home?
So what ends up happening is Nicolas Cage's character gets all the ingredients that he asked Amir to get. And so him and Amir end up cooking a dish.
And this is a really cool scene. And I want to backtrack a little bit when Rob tells Amir to get all the ingredients. And he says, "Tell them if you run into any problems, tell them I sent you." And Amir's like, "You want me to use your name?" And I feel like that's kind of like an insight to the relationship that Amir had with his dad.
Yeah, because there's that scene where he gets to that home where he finds out about Nicolas Cage's wife or girlfriend and hits the talk box and is just like, "Hi, I'm blah, blah, blah." And they're like, "Go away." And then he's like, "Oh, but I'm with Robin." And then they
And so I think that's kind of like, you get a sense that Rob and Amir, or I guess Amir kind of sees Rob as like a surrogate dad at this point.
Yeah.
Especially in the scene that we're about to talk about, which is when they're making, food. Because earlier on in the movie, when Amir makes Rob like French toast, like it's like shit. It's all bad. Like he says, Rob tells him that something he used was, the bread is expired. He's like, "You use expired bread for the French toast." And now here Rob is walking Amir through breaking down like a quail or like a
some kind
Cornish
of poultry.
hen. It's something really small. But yeah, he's basically making this meal along Amir. And so I thought that was a really good scene between them because they're just kind of like making this dish together that you find out is really important.
It's a really great montage of them just cooking in slow motion.
The music to that is really good too.
The music's really great. And like I said, it was shot really well. And like you're saying, it really creates a great bond between Amir and Rob. And then you find out he's like, go get your dad. And it's
like, what? He's been there the whole time?
Yeah, he's been in his office and Amir goes reluctantly and like opens the door. And what does Amir's dad say? Something like,
he says like, Dad, I made you dinner. And he says like, go away or leave
just
or
like,
something.
I don't want it.
Yeah.
I'm not interested. And Amir finally gets his dad to walk in and they're in the dining room. And
he doesn't like immediately punch Rob in the face. Like, what?
And so you sit down and then you put 2 and 2 together and you realize the dish that Amir and Rob cooked is the dish that Amir's dad and his mom had that completely blew their minds. And I was waiting for that moment where Amir's dad takes that bite and he just like breaks down.
Yeah.
Which happened. But it wasn't until the wine because when you see the plate of food and then Nic Cage shows Amir's dad the bottle of wine, I don't think he even realizes what it is yet until he kind of takes a whiff of it and then takes a drink. And it's after that where he like starts to break down and it's like, this is still the greatest shit I've ever had.
I think it really speaks to the power that food has. And I feel like that's a really important thematic element in the movie is the way that food brings people together. Whether be it like the dish that Amir's parents shared that stopped them from fighting, or, you know, the dish that Rob and Amir made together that brings them closer together, which happens to be the same dish. And then kind of using that same dish to bring back those memories in Amir's dad that finally gets him to tell Rob what happened to his pig, whereas before you couldn't convince him otherwise. So I think that kind of, and especially the way the movie's broken down into 3 different dishes, I thought was really clever. And you have all of these little tidbits of food throughout the film, like the scallop dish, and then you have the cookies and like how Rob gets an extra cookie for Amir. And that's kind of like a really cute kind of gesture. So I think that food connecting people when words can't is like an important thematic element in the movie.
The moment when you realize that Nicolas Cage was a chef, I thought the film was going to pivot just completely in that direction. And so what I appreciated is that the food isn't in your face though, you know, because after that moment I thought, oh, we're going to go to like kitchens and Nicolas Cage is going to like put on the suit and like become Mr. Chef again.
I kind of thought when Rob mentions to Amir that he needs a reservation at that one restaurant, that Amir was going to be like, I pictured it exactly that Amir was going to be like, yeah, I can get you a reservation, but you're going to need a suit or like something cheesy like that. And then there was going to be this like makeover montage with Nicolas Cage. And I was just like, oh my God, I hope that doesn't happen.
But like you said, it's like the food is like subtle. And that montage that preceded the scene that we're talking about isn't in your, like, that's probably the most in your face food is.
In the scene with the tart in the beginning, you don't even really see what it is. You see him making the tart, the dough, and that's it. You don't really see, and he's chopping mushrooms, I think is what you see.
Right.
And then when Amir makes the French toast, you don't really see any of what he made. You just see him like serve it. It's not until that last food sequence that you see exactly what they're making.
After Amir's dad gets extremely emotional over the meal, he walks out and Nicolas Cage goes after Amir's dad and they go into this separate room and he's like, Amir's dad's like getting a shot. He's like, damn it, he got to me.
Damn you.
Nicolas Cage once again asks like, what happened to my pig? And this is when you find out, huge spoiler. So again,
Big
if
spoiler,
you're still
if you've
listening,
been listening, don't listen.
Stop
It now.
I don't want to get angry emails and comments. Amir's dad tells Nicolas Cage that the guys who kidnapped the pig were too rough. The pig didn't survive, and the pig is basically dead. Another one of my favorite moments, and just moments in films in general, when you expect a loud crescendo,
Yes.
a loud moment,
Yes.
and the sound is sucked out, so
I
it's
love that.
silent.
It hits you even
It
harder
hurts
that
you
way.
even harder. And so what happens is you cut to Nicolas Cage's reaction, and obviously he's devastated. Going back to something before, I don't remember where the part of the movie it was, but
I was going to mention that too.
Nicolas Cage says that he's basically in love with the pig.
Yeah, he mentions because, Amir is kind of talking to Rob and is like, dude, we can get you another pig. Like, what is it about this pig?
Yeah.
And Rob is just like, it wasn't ever about the truffles. Like the pig can't even,
The
you find
trees tell
truffles,
you.
the trees tell you where the truffles are. The pig, I just love the pig. Like it's my one companion. I just really love the pig. And so that makes it all the more devastating when you find out that the pig actually died.
And so you're seeing Nicolas Cage just completely break down, but there's no sound. And
Yeah.
I think there's a little bit of music, but that's about it. So you
Yeah.
don't hear him crying. And again, the absence of sound where you expect it to be just makes it all that more heartbreaking and dramatic, and just it hurts.
I didn't necessarily think the pig was actually going to die. I thought it was going to be more the emotion of Rob's backstory. Like I thought we were going to find out more about his girlfriend and how she died
Right.
or why she died. Or I thought it was just going to be about Amir and like his dad and that relationship. But I thought I was like 60-40 that the pig was going to die. 40 that it was going to die, 60 that it wasn't going to die.
I was more like 70-30 that it was going to, 70 that it was going to die and 30 that it wasn't going to die. But I like that it wasn't that typical, like, I need to chase the pig and then you find it, tied up and you have two guys that are guarding it and then Nicolas
He
Cage
just
turns
kills
into
everyone.
like Samurai Warrior and like kills everyone. Like
Yeah.
I really appreciated that part.
Yeah.
So you find out what happened and then Nicolas Cage and Amir get into the car and they drive to that diner where Nicolas Cage first sort of came out of the woods, and they sort of look at each other like, what's left? What else is there to do? There was a moment, I think, when they're leaving,
Mhm.
because Nicolas Cage, rather than being driven back to his cabin by Amir, Nicolas Cage says, no, I want to walk. And so
I think that's after they have food at the diner.
yeah, Amir's like, oh, okay. And for a second, when he says, I'm going to walk, I thought that's when it was going to pivot into the ending I just told you, where he's going to go back to Portland
Oh, okay.
and
Yeah.
figure out that the pig isn't dead.
Yeah.
And then he's going to go apeshit and
Yeah.
kill everyone. But that doesn't happen.
No.
And then we cut to Amir in his car, and he's sort of left like, what do I do with my life? My dad's terrible and this business is terrible. And before that, Nicolas Cage tells him, I'll see you on Tuesday, because they're still going to have that relationship where
Mhm.
Nicolas Cage still finds truffles for Amir. And then my moment where you can tell that Amir is sort of over his old life, where the classical music comes on and he ends up turning it off.
Yeah.
And just kind of
And
like
he just like sleeps in his car. Yeah.
Nicolas Cage walks back to his cabin, and then he's on his bed, and there's just a look of loss in his face of like, this is my life now and I need to sort of keep going. And he grabs that cassette tape that says For Robin and puts it on the boombox and then plays it.
She says that she recorded the song for him because it reminded of him and it's his birthday.
And so the song plays, and then Nicolas Cage kind of like looks up, and then that's it. That's the end of the movie.
What's the song?
I don't remember.
It's I'm on Fire by The Boss.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Which when it was playing, I was like, oh my God, I know the song. What is the song? And then at the end I saw it was Bruce Springsteen and I was like, of course. I was trying to figure out what other movie that song is in, like the actual Bruce Springsteen.
Yeah, the version.
Yeah.
I can't remember, but it has to be in something.
Mm-hmm.
And then the credits start rolling, and the little tidbit that I talked about earlier, why you want to stay for the credits, because at the end they show all the dinner plates that they created and like the ingredients that they used and all of that. And I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
Like if you ever wanted to like recreate them.
Mm-hmm. I can't remember what the last one was called, but
yeah.
it's very fancy.
And it's also, I'd never seen that in a movie before. Even like foodie movies.
Foodie movies, yeah.
And that's pretty much the entire movie. Any final thoughts? You know, it's summarizing what the film meant to you or anything new that you thought of?
I feel like this is going to be one of those movies. I know I said that I probably wouldn't watch it again, but I'm probably going to at some point. This is probably one of those movies where kind of the more you watch it, the more you get into its thematic elements. Like after you watch it the first time and you have that element of food in your brain, you're going to notice a lot more of the food elements and kind of what those have to do with the overarching story, as well as it kind of being a story about loss and coming to terms with loss. And also, I don't know if this is like reaching, but it's kind of a story about the family that you make versus the family that you have. And this is me thinking about Amir and like his relationship with his dad versus the relationship that he has with Rob, which ends up being kind of like a father-son thing at the end.
Mm-hmm.
And Rob having the relationship with the pig, which is just like his family at this point because he's lost his family. So it has to do with like family and food and coming to terms with grief, I think.
That was my biggest takeaway is just the film is essentially about loss, you know, and it's losing a pig, it's losing your wife or girlfriend, it's losing your parents and that relationship between them and you and how you cope with that and the people that you meet along the way that can be like mentors and end up being better than your parents. And why I said the ending sort of left me initially wanting more was because of that of like, you know, he goes through all this loss and then he gets no redemption. He gets no satisfaction. He's just left there in his room by himself. But at the same time, the more I've thought about it, the more I realize, well, that's sort of how life happens sometimes.
Yeah. And also he gains a deeper relationship with Amir, I think. Like if there's one thing that he gains throughout the whole movie, it's that. Because before, I don't know how they even got into their business relationship because they don't really tell you. But, you know, before it was strictly just like, I'm coming to pick up the truffles. I came to drop off shit.
Yeah, they barely spoke to each other.
And he even jokes and he's like, dude, one time I'm going to come here, you're going to be dead and I'm going to be the one that finds you. And I think after the whole journey, they just become closer in that way to where they do actually kind of care about each other.
I feel like I would rewatch it again and find even more, like you were saying, deeper connections between the food and the relationships with people. I thought it was a little bit better than even Mandy. Because I think Mandy,
I think so too.
I mean, Mandy's just over the top and it's a completely different movie. But I think rewatchability wise, like there's a deeper meaning behind Pig than Mandy. Mandy's just a little bit more straightforward.
I could definitely have Mandy on in the background.
Yeah.
With my lights and stuff. Yeah. Like that'd be cool. But yeah, I get what you're saying.
Before we wrap up this shorty episode, we were sitting in the an aisle behind Nicolas Cage, and every so often I would look over.
I almost ran into him finding my seat.
We were trying to find our seats. He was sitting in the aisle seat.
This man is in my seat. It was Nicolas Cage.
And Angie hadn't even noticed. And like Angie almost like ran into him. And I was like, dude, he's like right there. And he had just this look of like, who are these people?
Yeah, that experience of the premiere was probably one of the cooler, because I've been to a lot of film stuff, you know, when like the stars are there. And that was probably one of the more low key ones to where they were legit like, boop, like Nicolas Cage was like 2 rows in front of us. And no one was really worried about like anything weird happening, which I thought was really cool.
I did get a kick out when I would look over. I would wait for bright scenes because again, the movie's very dark. It's not very bright. And I would look over. And that was probably the most Nic Cage thing I've ever seen. Nic Cage watching Nic Cage. Yeah, he was very focused. Oh, and then remember the false start?
That was really funny. So the movie started and they showed like the neon logo. And there was no sound. Normally, you know, you have like the neon buzzing and there was no sound. And then the screen just kind of went black and the lights turned back on.
And people were like,
and everyone was like, what?
And I looked over Nic Cage and like both his hands were on his forehead like.
But the funnier part was that Alex Wolff turned around because Alex Wolff was sitting in front of him and he turned around and he was like, oh, it's over. You fell asleep. You didn't. It's over now. And then,
But Nic Cage still had
He was
the
just like-
most serious face.
Yeah.
And he was like that throughout most of the movie, very intense. And even when he introduced the movie, he was like, hi, I can't wait for you to see the movie. And then that was
and
it.
it was like,
And then even before the credits rolled, he was out of there.
and I think I'll put this, I guess you can call the genre food movies, but like Chef, Burnt, No Reservations, which I'm adding on there, is like one of my favorite like subgenres of
Oh, yeah.
Ratatouille. Yeah, just like
Yeah.
food movies.
Yeah, the best. Having said that, that wraps up our little quick review of Pig. We highly recommend that you guys check it out for yourselves and make up your own minds about the movie. And we'd love to hear comments. You know, again, it comes out this weekend everywhere. And it would really be cool to read comments about what you guys thought, what you agreed, disagreed, all that. Remember to subscribe again. We're on YouTube. All the likes and comments benefit us a great deal. We're also on Twitter and Instagram @CutMoviePod. The next shorty that we're going to do, we're going to try to put it up by next week, but it's another movie that's going to come out this next weekend, which also has Alex in it, which is a big giveaway, and really stoked to see it.
This one will be a big one for horror fans. I'm not going to say it's necessarily in the horror genre, but because of the director, I know a lot of horror fans will go see this.
Yeah, thriller. I mean, it's definitely going to be a thriller.
Sci-fi?
I don't know. We don't know. Like, maybe. We want to thank everyone for listening and watching on YouTube. Again, any subscriptions, likes, comments, go to town because we really want to hear from you guys. Thanks again for listening. Cut. That's a wrap.